Left alone with a child, she fought for their future. Cetinja found the note beside a half-empty drawer and a silence that felt like a scream. "I'm not ready for this. I'm sorry." No signature, no goodbye, just a crib, a baby, and a world that suddenly felt too big. She stared at her son, barely a few months old, and whispered, "I guess it's just us now. Welcome back and enjoy the story." The afternoon light filtered through the thin curtains of Cetinja's modest apartment in Chicago, casting long shadows across the worn carpet. She stood frozen, the piece of paper trembling in her hand, her eyes darting between the hastily scribbled note and the sleeping infant in the second-hand crib. Thomas had left without even saying the words aloud, just slipped away while she was at the corner store buying formula. One moment they were a struggling young family, and the next she was completely alone with 3-month-old Danny. At 23, Cetinja Martinez had already weathered more storms than most. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, she'd worked her way through community college, the first in her family to pursue higher education. She had dreams of becoming a teacher someday, dreams that had been put on hold when Danny came along, earlier than planned, but welcomed with open arms, at least by her. Thomas had smiled and said all the right things, but the tension had been building for months, the late nights at work that grew later, the arguments about money, the silences that stretched between them like a widening fault line. Now, as the reality of his abandonment sank in, Cetinja felt her chest constrict with panic. Her part-time job at the diner barely covered rent. They'd been scraping by on Thomas's income from the auto shop. The small savings she'd put aside for emergencies would last a month, maybe 2. Her parents lived across the country, and relations had been strained since she'd moved in with Thomas against their wishes. Pride kept her from calling them now, from admitting they'd been right. Danny stirred in his sleep, tiny fingers curling against the blanket. Cetinja wiped away the tears she hadn't realized were falling and straightened her shoulders. There would be time for breaking down later, when Danny was asleep and she was alone in the darkness. For now, she had to be strong. She had to figure out what came next. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, reaching down to gently stroke his cheek. "Somehow, I'll make sure of it." The words felt hollow in the empty apartment, but Cetinja forced herself to believe them. She had to, because now it wasn't just her future at stake, but Danny's too, and she would move mountains before she let him down. That night, after putting Danny to bed, Cetinja sat at the small kitchen table with a pad of paper and a pencil, calculating and recalculating their expenses. The numbers wouldn't balance no matter how she arranged them. Rent, utilities, food, diapers, even cutting out every non-essential, they wouldn't make it on her current income. She would need to find a second job, maybe even a third. But who would watch Danny? Daycare was prohibitively expensive, and she didn't have friends or family nearby who could help. As the reality of her situation pressed down on her, Cetinja felt the first tendrils of real fear taking root. Not just worry or anxiety, but bone-deep terror that she might fail her son before he'd even had a chance at life. She buried her face in her hands, allowing herself 5 minutes, just 5, to feel the full weight of her despair. Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her back, and picked up the pencil again. There had to be a way. She just hadn't found it yet. The following week was a blur of activity as Cetinja adjusted to her new reality. She spoke with her manager at the diner, explaining her situation and securing as many shifts as possible. She placed an advertisement in the local paper offering sewing services. Her grandmother had taught her well, and she still had the old Singer machine Thomas had found at a garage sale the previous summer. She visited the community center and collected information about assistance programs for single mothers, swallowing her pride as she filled out application after application. At night, when Danny was finally asleep, she taught herself to make simple confections, caramels and fudge and chocolate-dipped pretzels that she could sell at the bus stop near the diner. The extra 2 hours of sleep she sacrificed each night were worth it for the few additional dollars she made each day. Her neighbors, an elderly couple who had always greeted her warmly in the hallway, noticed her comings and goings at all hours. Mrs. Peterson knocked on her door one evening, offering to watch Danny for a few hours while Cetinja picked up an extra shift. "Everyone needs help sometimes, dear," she said, waving away Cetinja's tearful thanks. "That's what neighbors are for." It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, but it was a start. A small kindness in a world that suddenly seemed very cold and very harsh. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing, winter descended on Chicago with a vengeance that year, bringing with it bone-chilling winds that cut through Cetinja's threadbare coat as she made her way from the diner to her second job cleaning offices at night. Mrs. Peterson had been a godsend, watching Danny in the evenings while charging only a fraction of what daycare would have cost. But even with the older woman's help, Cetinja was barely keeping her head above water. The apartment was always cold now. She'd turned the heat down to the minimum to save on utilities, wrapping Danny in layers of blankets and warming his bottles with hot water from the tap rather than using the stove. She'd sold most of her jewelry, the few pieces she'd inherited from her grandmother and the small diamond pendant Thomas had given her on their 1-year anniversary, to cover the rent. When she'd fallen short in December, food came from the discounted section at the grocery store or from the diner, where her manager turned a blind eye when she wrapped up leftover soup or day-old bread to take home. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford, not when Danny's needs came first. The physical toll of her new routine was beginning to show. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath her eyes, and her clothes hung loose on her frame. Sleep was a rare commodity, snatched in 1-hour increments between feeding Danny and rushing to her next job. There were days when she felt as though she were moving through a fog, her body operating on autopilot while her mind struggled to keep up. It was on one such day, as winter gave way to a reluctant spring, that Cetinja first met Uberta Jackson. The elegant black woman came into the diner, just as Cetinja's shift was ending, sitting at the counter and ordering coffee. Uberta was striking, tall and regal, with silver threading through her dark hair and a warm smile that transformed her stern features. She was also extremely particular about her coffee, sending it back twice before declaring it acceptable. "You've got patience, child," she told Cetinja, who had remained unfailingly polite throughout the exchange. Not everyone would handle a fussy old woman with such grace. Cetinja managed a tired smile. "No trouble at all, ma'am." "Uberta," the woman corrected. "Ma'am makes me feel ancient, and I've got enough reminders of that without your help." Despite her exhaustion, Cetinja found herself warming to the older woman's direct manner. They chatted briefly as Cetinja wiped down the counter, with Uberta asking pointed questions about Cetinja's background and current situation. There was something comforting about her interest, about the way she listened with genuine attention, rather than the pitying looks Cetinja had grown accustomed to receiving. As Cetinja prepared to leave for her next job, Uberta handed her a business card. "I run a small tailoring business on Oakwood Avenue," she explained. "Been looking for someone who can handle basic alterations to free up my time for the more complex work. Your manager tells me you sew. Stop by tomorrow if you're interested." Cetinja clutched the card like a lifeline, hope fluttering in her chest for the first time in months. Tailoring would pay better than cleaning offices, and the shop was only a few blocks from Mrs. Peterson's apartment. It wasn't a solution to all her problems, but it was an opportunity, a chance to use a skill she actually possessed, rather than simply exchanging her time for the lowest possible wage. That night, as she rocked Danny to sleep in the chair by the window. Cetinja allowed herself to imagine a future where things might be just a little bit easier, where she might have time to read to her son rather than rushing constantly from one task to the next, where they might have enough for a new pair of shoes or a treat from the bakery once in a while. It was a small dream, modest in its ambitions, but after months of simply surviving, even that felt like reaching for the stars. The following day, with Danny settled at Mrs. Peterson's, Cetinja made her way to Uberta's shop. The small storefront was nestled between a barber shop and a record store, with a faded awning proclaiming Jackson's Fine Tailoring in elegant script. Inside, the space was warm and cluttered in a comfortable way, with rolls of fabric stacked along one wall and a counter covered in patterns and pins and measuring tapes. Uberta herself sat at an industrial sewing machine, glasses perched on the end of her nose as she guided a length of dark wool beneath the needle with practiced precision. She looked up as the bell above the door announced Cetinja's entrance, her expression warming with recognition. "So you came," she said, removing her glasses and setting them aside. "Good, I was hoping you would." The interview, if it could be called that, was brief and to the point. Uberta asked about Cetinja's experience with sewing, had her demonstrate a few basic stitches on a scrap of fabric, and then nodded with satisfaction. "You've got a good hand," she declared. "Not as much experience as I'd like, but I can teach you what you need to know. Hours are 9 to 5, Tuesday through Saturday. Pay is fair, and you can bring your boy if you need to. There's a small room in the back where he can nap." Cetinja blinked, certain she had misheard. "Bring Danny, are you sure?" Uberta's expression softened slightly. "I raised 3 children in this shop, girl. 2 of them are doctors now, and the third runs a restaurant downtown. A baby won't bother me as long as the work gets done." She paused, studying Cetinja's face. "I know what it's like, trying to make it on your own with a child. It's not easy. And this world isn't always kind to women in your position, but you strike me as a fighter, and I respect that." Tears pricked at the corners of Cetinja's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. Crying in front of her potential new employer wouldn't make a good impression. But Uberta's understanding, her matter-of-fact acceptance of Cetinja's situation without judgment or pity, touched something deep inside her. A wounded place that had been raw and aching since Thomas's departure. "When can I start?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Tomorrow," Uberta replied. 9 o'clock sharp. Don't be late." As Cetinja walked away from the shop, the spring sunshine felt warmer somehow, the weight on her shoulders just a fraction lighter. For the first time in months, she felt something stirring in her chest. Not quite hope, not yet, but the possibility of it. A tiny spark that might, with careful tending, grow into something more. That night, as she prepared for bed, Cetinja found herself humming softly, a habit she'd abandoned in the dark days after Thomas left. The tune was barely audible, just a whisper of melody as she folded laundry and tidied the apartment. But it was there, a small act of defiance against the circumstances that had threatened to crush her spirit. Danny watched her from his crib, eyes wide and curious, tiny fingers reaching toward the sound of her voice. In that moment, with her son looking at her as though she were the entire world, Cetinja made a silent promise. She would find a way forward. She would build a life for them, brick by painstaking brick if necessary. And someday, somehow, they would thrive, not just survive. What she couldn't know then was just how difficult that promise would be to keep, or that the true challenges were only beginning. But will she overcome them? Will she find the strength to face what lies ahead? How far will Cetinja go to secure her son's future? The answers await as our story continues. Summer arrived in a blaze of heat that turned the small apartment into an oven. despite the ancient window fan that rattled and wheezed day and night. Danny had just celebrated his first birthday, a modest affair with a small cake Cetinha had made herself and presents wrapped in newspaper, a wooden toy car she'd found at a thrift store, and a stuffed bear that Mrs. Peterson had sewn from scraps of fabric. Working at Huberta's shop had been a lifeline. The older woman was strict but fair, teaching Cetinha the finer points of tailoring with brisk efficiency, while treating Danny as if he were one of her own grandchildren. On slow afternoons, Huberta would sometimes take him onto her lap, telling him stories in her rich, melodic voice, while Cetinha completed alterations for customers. "That boy is going to be something special," Huberta would say, bouncing Danny. On her knee, got a look in his eyes like he's figuring out the world already. Cetinha treasured these moments, these small pockets of normalcy in a life that still felt precarious despite her best efforts. The work at the tailor shop had allowed her to quit the cleaning job, giving her precious extra hours with Danny each day. But finances remained tight, a constant source of stress that kept her awake at night, staring at the ceiling and calculating figures in her head. She was still making and selling sweets on weekends, using Huberta's kitchen when the older woman offered it, creating more elaborate confections that she sold at local festivals and farmers' markets. The extra income helped fill the gaps, allowing her to start a small savings account for emergencies and Danny's future. But it meant sacrificing her only days off, pushing her body beyond exhaustion week after week. The physical toll was evident in the new lines around her eyes, the way her hands sometimes trembled with fatigue by day's end. But there was a new steadiness to her now, a quiet determination that hadn't been there in those first desperate months. Cetinha was learning to stand on her own, to navigate a world that had never prepared her for the challenges she now faced daily. It was at one of the summer festivals, as Cetinha sold her homemade caramels and chocolate-dipped strawberries, from a small booth, that she encountered Vancy Clark, a former classmate from community college. Vancy had always been vivacious and confident, with a booming laugh and an easy charm that drew people to her. Now she approached Cetinha's booth with the same boundless energy, her eyes widening with recognition. "Cetinha Martinez, I thought—" "That was you!" she exclaimed, reaching across the table to grasp Cetinha's hand. "It's been, 2 years? How have you been?" The question, innocent as it was, caught Cetinha off guard. How had she been? How could she possibly explain the journey of the past year, the abandonment, the struggle, the endless work just to stay afloat? The version of herself that Vancy remembered, the ambitious student with dreams of becoming a teacher, seemed to belong to another lifetime. "I've been managing," she replied finally, gesturing to the display of confections. "I'm working at a tailor shop now and doing this on the side." "These look amazing," Vancy said, selecting a chocolate truffle and biting into it with evident appreciation. "Oh my God, they taste even better. You always were good in our home ec class." She paused, studying Cetinha more closely. "But teaching was your dream, wasn't it? Are you still planning to go back to finish your degree?" The question struck a tender spot in Cetinha's heart. Teaching had been her dream, a way to make a difference in children's lives while providing a stable future for herself. But that dream had receded into the distance, becoming smaller and fainter with each passing month as the immediate demands of survival took precedence. "Someday, maybe," she said, the words hollow even to her own ears. "Things are complicated. Right now," as if on cue, Danny began to fuss in his portable playpen behind the booth, drawing Vancy's attention. Her eyebrows rose slightly, putting together the pieces of Cetinha's situation. "You have a baby," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I had no idea. He's adorable." "His name is Danny," Cetinha replied, lifting him into her arms. "He just turned 1. "And his father?" Vancy asked, the question tentative but curious. "Not in the picture," Cetinha said, the practiced response coming automatically now. She had learned to deliver it without flinching, without revealing the hurt that still lingered beneath the surface. Vancy's expression softened with understanding. I'm sorry, that must be tough. She hesitated, then continued with characteristic directness. Listen, I'm teaching at the community center now, art classes for kids. We're always looking for assistant teachers for the summer programs. It's not much, just evenings and weekends, but it pays decent and you could bring your little one along. Might be a good way to get your foot back in the door if you're still interested in teaching. The offer was unexpected, a sudden glimpse of possibility where Cetinha had seen only closed doors. Teaching, even in a limited capacity, would be a step toward reclaiming the dream she'd reluctantly set aside, but taking on another commitment, especially one in the evenings when she was already stretched so thin. I'll think about it, she promised, the flutter of hope in her chest tempered by practical concerns. Thank you for thinking of me. As the festival wound down and Cetinha packed up her unsold treats, her mind kept returning to Vancy's offer. The practical part of her, the part that had learned to count every penny and plan for every contingency, argued that she was already working to her limit. Adding another responsibility might be the thing that finally broke her. But another voice, quieter but persistent, whispered of opportunities and open doors, of dreams deferred but not abandoned, of setting an example for Danny, not just of survival, but of pursuing passion and purpose even when the path was difficult. That night, as she tucked Danny into his crib, now converted to a toddler bed with the side removed, Cetinha found herself at a crossroads. The safe choice would be to maintain the status quo. Challenging as it was, she had found a way to make it work. But safety had never been what she dreamed of for herself or for her son. Did she have the courage to reach for more, even knowing that failure was a possibility? And what would this decision mean for Danny's future? Would pursuing her own dreams ultimately benefit him? Or was she being selfish to even consider it? These were the questions that kept Cetinha awake long into the night, turning possibilities over in her mind as the city outside her window hummed with summer life. What choice will Cetinha make? And how will it change the course of their lives? The answers await as we continue this journey together. Autumn arrived with a riot of color and cooler temperatures that brought relief from the summer's oppressive heat. Danny was growing rapidly, his vocabulary expanding daily as he toddled around the apartment with increasing confidence. His favorite word was mama, which he used liberally, reaching for Cetinha with complete trust that she would always be there to catch him. The weight of that trust was both beautiful and terrifying. In the 4 months since the summer festival, Cetinha had taken a leap of faith, accepting Vancy's offer to assist with art classes at the community center 3 evenings a week. The additional income was modest but welcome, allowing her to build their small emergency fund while gaining valuable experience in the classroom. The schedule was punishing. Mornings and afternoons at Uberta's shop, evenings at the community center, weekends split between making confections and selling them at local markets. Sleep became a luxury she could rarely afford, and there were days when exhaustion made even the simplest tasks feel monumental. But there were rewards too, ones that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. The joy of watching children discover their creativity, the satisfaction of helping them learn and grow, the way Danny's eyes lit up when he played with the other children during the classes. These moments sustained Cetinha through the long days and even longer nights, reminding her of the purpose behind her struggle. Uberta had been surprisingly supportive of Cetinha's new endeavor, adjusting her hours at the shop to accommodate the evening classes and offering advice drawn from her own experience raising children while building a business. "You're doing too much," she observed bluntly one afternoon, as Cetinha's hands fumbled with a simple seam, fatigue evident in the dark shadows beneath her eyes. But I understand why. Just remember that burning yourself out won't help that boy of yours in the long run. It was a concern that Cetinja herself wrestled with daily. Was she shortchanging Danny by spreading herself so thin? He spent much of his time in the care of others now. Mrs. Peterson, Uberta, the volunteer who supervised the children during community center classes. Though Cetinja made their time together count, reading stories and playing games and covering his face with kisses, she couldn't help wondering if it was enough. The doubt was particularly acute on the rare occasions when she encountered other mothers, women who seemed to have it all together, whose children had new clothes and attended proper preschools, whose lives seemed to unfold with an ease that Cetinja could only envy from a distance. One such encounter occurred at a parent-child playgroup that Vancy had encouraged her to attend at the community center. The other mothers were welcoming enough, offering polite smiles as Cetinja joined their circle with Danny clutching her hand. But their conversation revolved around topics that highlighted the gulf between their lives and hers: vacation plans and home renovations, preschool applications and piano lessons. "And what does your husband do?" one woman asked Cetinja during a lull in the conversation, the question innocent but loaded with assumptions. "I'm not married," Cetinja replied, her voice steady despite the familiar twist of discomfort in her stomach. "It's just Danny and me." The woman's smile faltered momentarily before she recovered, murmuring something about how strong Cetinja must be. But the damage was done. She could feel the shift in the group's perception, the subtle reclassification. From one of us to other. It was a dynamic she had encountered before and would encounter again. The unspoken judgment, the pity tinged with wariness, as if single motherhood was somehow contagious. Wanda Lewis, a fellow assistant teacher at the community center, observed the interaction from across the room and joined Cetinja as the play session ended, helping her gather Danny's things. "Don't let them get to you," she said quietly, her dark eyes kind beneath stylishly cropped hair. "Half those women are one divorce away from being exactly where you are, only they don't have your guts or your skills." Cetinja managed a small smile at the unexpected support. Wanda was a few years older than her, raising 2 children on her own after losing her husband in an industrial accident. Despite the tragedy that had shaped her life, she maintained a warmth and humor that Cetinja admired greatly. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing," Cetinja confessed as they walked toward the bus stop together, Danny half asleep in her arms. "Working all these jobs, barely seeing him some days, is it worth it?" Wanda's response was thoughtful, measured in a way that spoke of her own struggles with similar questions. "My grandmother used to say that children need roots and wings," she said. "The roots come from knowing they're loved, that they have a safe place to land. The wings come from watching the people they love pursue their own dreams, even when it's hard." She smiled down at Danny, who was now fully asleep against Cetinja's shoulder. "From what I've seen, that boy of yours has deep roots, and watching you fight for your dreams will give him powerful wings someday." The words stayed with Cetinja long after they parted ways, a counterbalance to the doubts that crept in during her weakest moments. She was doing her best, imperfect as it was, stretched thin as she sometimes felt, to provide both roots and wings for her son. Perhaps that was all any parent could truly offer. As the autumn deepened toward winter, bringing with it the anticipation of Danny's second Christmas, Cetinja found herself taking stock of how far they had come. The apartment was still small, still in a neighborhood that made her double-check the locks at night, but it was warmer this winter. The heat turned up to a comfortable level rather than the bare minimum. Danny had new clothes, not just second-hand, vines, and a small collection of books that they read together each night before bed. The emergency fund in her bank account was modest, but growing, a buffer against the unexpected that gave Cetinja a sense of security she hadn't felt since before Thomas left. These were small victories, easily overlooked in the daily hustle of their lives. But together they represented something profound, a foundation being built brick by painstaking brick, a future taking shape despite the odds stacked against them. What Sitinya couldn't know was that the coming year would test that foundation in ways she could never have anticipated. That the delicate balance she had worked so hard to achieve was about to be disrupted by forces beyond her control. Have you ever known someone who had to rebuild their life from scratch? Someone who faced overwhelming odds but kept fighting anyway? Share your thoughts in the comments. The first sign of trouble came in February, a bitter cold month that had Chicago in its grip, turning the streets into treacherous paths of ice and snow. Sitinya noticed the cough first, a dry, persistent hack that left Danny listless and irritable. She told herself it was just a cold, one of the many minor illnesses that children picked up and shook off with remarkable resilience. Nothing to worry about. But when his temperature spiked in the middle of the night, his small body burning, with fever despite the children's acetaminophen she'd given him, worry bloomed into fear. The pediatric urgent care clinic was across town, an impossible journey in the pre-dawn hours with public transportation running on reduced schedules. Calling an ambulance would mean a bill she couldn't afford, so Sitinya bundled Danny in layers of blankets and carried him through the snow to the nearest hospital emergency room, her heart pounding with each labored breath he took against her shoulder. The hospital waiting room was crowded with others seeking refuge from winter ailments. Elderly patients with pneumonia, children with flu, adults nursing injuries from falls on the ice. Sitinya took a number and found a seat in the corner, cradling Danny close as he dozed fitfully in her arms. The clock on the wall ticked away the hours as they waited, each minute an eternity, as Danny's fever refused to break. When they were finally seen, the diagnosis was pneumonia. Not immediately life-threatening, but serious enough to require hospitalization. The doctor's words blurred together as Sitinya struggled to process what was happening, to understand the implications for Danny and for the careful balance she had constructed in their lives. "We'll need to keep him for at least 3 days," the doctor explained, her expression kind but firm. Possibly longer, depending on how he responds to treatment. 3 days. 3 days of missed work, of lost income they couldn't afford to lose. 3 days in a hospital with costs that her modest insurance would only partially cover. 3 days of watching her son struggle to breathe, attached to monitors and IVs in a sterile room that smelled of disinfectant and illness. The hospital staff was efficient and compassionate, settling Danny into a pediatric bed and starting him on intravenous antibiotics. A nurse showed Sitinya how the reclining chair beside the bed converted into a narrow cot where she could sleep. "Not comfortable," she admitted, "but better than trying to rest in a chair." Sitinya nodded numbly, already calculating how she would manage the coming days. She would need to call Uberta and Vancy, explain the situation, and hope they would understand. She would need to somehow keep up with her confection orders, perhaps asking Mrs. Peterson to deliver the ones already completed. She would need to find a way to pay for whatever portion of the hospital bill her insurance didn't cover. Uberta's response to her early morning call was immediate and practical. "Don't worry about the shop," she said firmly. "Focus on your boy. Your job will be waiting when he's better." Vancy was equally understanding, promising to cover Sitinya's classes and send positive thoughts for Danny's recovery. Their support was a lifeline, but it didn't erase the cold reality of bills that would continue to arrive, whether she was working or not. As Danny finally fell into a more restful sleep, the antibiotics beginning their work against the infection, in his lungs, Sitinya allowed herself a moment of despair. She had been so careful, building their life with such precision, setting aside what little she could for emergencies just like this one. But would it be enough? And what would happen? If Danny's recovery took longer than expected, if the costs mounted beyond what she had prepared for. The questions circled in her mind like vultures as she curled up on the narrow cot, too exhausted to stay awake, but too anxious to truly rest. Whatever came next, she would face it. She had no choice. But for the first time in many months, Cetinha found herself doubting whether she truly had the strength to weather this newest storm. The hospital days blended together in a haze of constant monitoring, medication schedules, and fitful sleep snatched in uncomfortable positions. Danny improved slowly, his fever receding and his breathing becoming less labored, but the doctor remained cautious about his recovery. Children can take quick turns, both for better and worse, she explained during morning rounds on the third day. I'd like to keep him one more night, just to be safe. One more night, one more day of missed work, one more addition to the bill that was growing with each passing hour. Cetinha nodded her agreement. Danny's health came first, always, but her stomach clenched with anxiety at the implications. It was during this fourth day, as she sat beside Danny's bed, reading him a story from one of the well-worn books in the pediatric ward, that an unexpected visitor arrived. Uberta stood in the doorway, elegant as always in a tailored wool coat, carrying a large paper bag that emitted enticing aromas. "They said he's doing better," she announced without preamble, setting the bag on the small table by the window. "Brought you some real food. That cafeteria stuff will kill you faster than whatever put him in here." The normality of Uberta's brisk manner, the familiar rhythms of her speech after days in the sterile hospital environment, brought tears to Cetinha's eyes that she quickly blinked away. "Thank you," she said, her voice rougher than she intended. "For the food and for coming." Uberta waved away her thanks, focusing her attention on Danny, who had perked up at the sight of a familiar face. "And you, young man," she said, her tone softening slightly as she approached the bed. "Giving your mama grey hairs already. What am I going to do with you?" Danny's smile was still weak, but it was there. The first genuine smile Cetinha had seen from him since before the fever struck. It was a small moment, but it kindled a spark of hope in her chest. He was getting better. They would get through this, as they had gotten through everything else. As Danny dozed off again, exhausted by the brief interaction, Uberta gestured for Cetinha to join her by the window. "We need to talk," she said quietly, "about what happens after he gets out of here." The direct approach was classic Uberta, but it still caught Cetinha off guard. She had been so focused on the immediate crisis, getting Danny well enough to leave the hospital, that she had pushed thoughts of the aftermath to the back of her mind. "I know I've missed almost a week of work," she began, anxiety tightening her throat. "I can make up the hours, work weekends." Uberta cut her off with a raised hand. "This isn't about the work, girl. It's about you trying to do everything, yourself until you collapse." Her expression was stern, but not unkind as she continued. "Your boy got sick because he's a child, and children get sick. But you were already running on empty before this happened. Something has to give." The word struck with the force of truth, piercing the protective shell Cetinha had built around herself. She had been pushing beyond her limits for so long. That exhaustion had become her normal state, a constant companion she had learned to ignore. But Uberta was right. It wasn't sustainable. She couldn't continue this way indefinitely, not without consequences for both her and Danny. "What choice do I have?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm doing what I have to do to keep us afloat." Uberta's response was measured, considered in a way that suggested she had been thinking about this long before Danny's illness. "There's a difference between staying afloat and drowning slowly," she said. "You've been doing the latter for too long now." She paused, seemingly weighing her next words carefully. "I have a proposal for you, a way to maybe make things a little easier." Hope flared briefly in Cetinya's chest, quickly tempered by caution. Life had taught her that solutions rarely came without complications, that every opportunity carried its own set of challenges. What kind of proposal? Uberta's answer would open a door to possibilities Cetinya had not allowed herself to consider, a potential turning point in their story that could change everything. But would it be enough to break the cycle of barely surviving? "I'm thinking of taking on a partner at the shop," Uberta said, her eyes fixed on Cetinya with characteristic directness. "Getting older, and some days these hands don't work like they used to." She flexed her fingers as if to demonstrate. "Been looking for the right person for a while now. Someone with talent. Someone who understands what it means to build something. From nothing." She paused. "I think that person might be you." Cetinya stared at her, certain she had misunderstood. "A partner? At Jackson's? But I'm still learning. I don't have the experience." "Experience comes with time," Uberta interrupted. "What can't be taught is determination, and you've got that in spades. I've watched you this past year, working yourself to the bone without complaint. That's the kind of person I want beside me and eventually after me." The implication of those last words hung in the air between them. Uberta wasn't just offering a partnership. She was offering a future, a legacy. Something that could provide stability for Cetinya and Danny long-term, not just the precarious day-to-day existence they'd been living. "It wouldn't be easy," Uberta continued, practical as ever. "You'd need to learn the business side of things. Accounting, inventory, dealing with suppliers. And I can't pay you much more at first, but you'd have regular hours, benefits eventually, and most importantly, you'd be building something that could last. Something you could pass on to your boy someday if he wanted it." Cetinya's mind raced, with possibilities and doubts. It was more than she had dared to hope for, a chance at real security rather than just survival. But it would mean setting aside her teaching aspirations, committing to a path different from the one she had originally envisioned for herself. "I don't need an answer now," Uberta said, seeing the conflict in Cetinya's expression. "Take some time. Think it through. The offer will stand when you're ready." As Uberta prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "One more thing. There's an apartment above the shop, small but decent. Been using it for storage mostly. Could be fixed up, though. Rent would be reasonable." She delivered this information casually, as if it were an afterthought, rather than another life-changing proposition. After Uberta left, Cetinya sat in the quiet hospital room, watching Danny sleep. An apartment above the shop would mean no more long bus rides across town, no more rushing between jobs to make it home in time. It would mean extra minutes with Danny each day, perhaps even hours. It would mean a fresh start in a better neighborhood, away from the memories that still lingered in every corner of their current place. But accepting Uberta's offer meant choosing a definite path when Cetinya had been carefully keeping all options open. It meant committing to a future in tailoring rather than teaching, at least for now. It meant acknowledging that some dreams might need to be deferred longer than she had hoped, perhaps indefinitely. The decision weighed on her through the night and into the following morning, when the doctor finally pronounced Danny well enough to go home. As Cetinya gathered their few belongings and prepared for discharge, her thoughts kept returning to Uberta's words. A partnership, a stable future, a new home. Was it what she wanted? More importantly, was it what Danny needed? The answer came to her as they stepped outside the hospital into the weak February sunshine. Danny, still pale but recovering, looked up at the sky with wonder, pointing at a plane passing overhead. "Look, Mama!" he exclaimed, his voice stronger than it had been in days. In that moment, seeing the world through his eyes, full of wonder and possibility, Cetinya knew what she had to do. The path forward wasn't about choosing between her dreams and his needs. It was about finding a way to honor both. to create a life where security and aspiration could coexist. She would accept Uberta's offer. She would learn the business, become the partner the older woman envisioned. But she wouldn't abandon her teaching dreams entirely. Perhaps there was a middle path, continuing with the community center classes, saving for future education, finding ways to incorporate teaching into whatever shape her life took next. The decision once made brought with it a sense of peace she hadn't expected, not because the road ahead would be easy, she harbored no such illusions, but because for the first time since Thomas's departure, she was choosing a direction rather than simply reacting to circumstances beyond her control. The following months brought changes both profound and subtle. The move to the apartment above the shop came first, a whirlwind weekend of packing and unpacking with help from Mrs. Peterson, Wanda, and several of Uberta's longtime customers who arrived with cleaning supplies and home-cooked meals. The space was indeed small, just 2 bedrooms, a combined living room and kitchen, and a bathroom with ancient but functional fixtures. But it was clean and solid, with large windows that filled it with light and the comforting sounds of the neighborhood drifting up from the street below. Learning the business side of the tailor shop proved more challenging than the sewing itself. Uberta was a demanding teacher, insisting on precision in the accounts just as she did in hemlines and seams. There were difficult days when Cetinha doubted her decision, when the numbers refused to balance or a demanding customer pushed her patience to its limits. But there were rewards too, the satisfaction of mastering a complex alteration, the warmth of regular customers who began to ask for her by name, the growing confidence that came with each new skill acquired. Danny thrived in their new environment. The neighborhood children quickly accepted him into their games, and the shop itself became an extension of their home, with a small play area set up in the back room where he could entertain himself while Cetinha and Uberta worked. He grew fascinated with the colorful buttons and fabric scraps, creating imaginative stories about them that had both women smiling behind their sewing machines. Spring gave way to summer, bringing with it Danny's 3rd birthday. This celebration was more elaborate than previous ones, held in the small courtyard behind the shop, with a proper cake from the bakery down the street, and guests that included not just their small circle of friends, but many of the shop's regular customers as well. Watching Danny blow out his candles, surrounded by people who had come to care for him, Cetinha felt a swell of pride and gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "You've done good by that boy," Uberta said quietly, appearing at her side with a cup of punch. "Better than most would have managed in your shoes." The words were understated, typical Uberta, but they meant more to Cetinha than any elaborate praise. Coming from a woman who rarely offered compliments, they were a validation of the countless sacrifices and difficult choices that had brought them to this point. "We still have a long way to go," Cetinha replied, watching as Danny opened a present with careful concentration, his face lighting up at the discovery of a toy truck inside. "True enough," Uberta agreed, "but you're on the right path now." That counts for something. The right path was not without its complications. As Danny approached preschool age, Cetinha faced new decisions about his education and care. The neighborhood had decent public schools, but nothing exceptional. Private education was financially out of reach, even with her improved circumstances. After much deliberation, she enrolled him in a small cooperative preschool run by a local church, where parents contributed time rather than money to keep costs manageable. This meant adjusting the shop hours to accommodate her volunteer sessions at the preschool, a change Uberta accepted with minimal grumbling. "Children need their mothers," she said simply. "The customers can wait an extra hour on Tuesdays." The rhythms of their life settled into a new pattern, mornings at the shop, afternoons split between work and Danny's activities, evenings together in their apartment above. Cetinha still taught at the community center 1 night a week, unwilling to completely surrender that connection to her original dreams. She had begun taking a single class each semester at the community college as well, slowly working toward the degree she had once abandoned. It would take years at this pace, but that no longer seemed like a failure. Instead, it was a testament to her determination, a refusal to fully relinquish any part of herself despite the obstacles. The partnership with Uberta formalized on the second anniversary of Cetinha's start at the shop. There were papers to sign, legal details to address, but the most meaningful aspect was the small ceremony Uberta insisted upon. In front of their regular customers and friends, she presented Cetinha with a beautifully crafted brass key to the shop, symbolic of her new status. "This place has been my life for 30 years, Uberta announced, her usually brisk voice softening with emotion. "Now it's our life together, and someday it will be yours alone. Take care of it as I have, and it will take care of you and your boy for many years to come." And as their small audience applauded, Cetinha caught sight of Danny watching from his spot near the window, his expression solemn, as if he understood the significance of the moment despite his young age. She beckoned him forward, kneeling to his level as he approached. "This is for us, baby," she whispered, showing him the key. "A future we're building together." Danny touched the key with curious fingers, his dark eyes serious. "Can I help build it too, Mama?" The innocent question, laden with more meaning than he could possibly understand, squeezed Cetinha's heart. "You already are," she assured him, pulling him close. "Every single day." That evening, as they walked home through the summer twilight, Danny's small hand warm in hers, Cetinha found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. From the shock of Thomas's abandonment to the desperate months of barely surviving, from the endless work and worry to this moment of relative peace. It had been a path marked by hardship, but also by unexpected kindness, by doors closing and others opening, by small victories that had gradually accumulated into something like stability. They were not wealthy, not even particularly comfortable by most standards. The future still held uncertainties that kept Cetinha awake some nights. But they had enough food, enough warmth, enough security to breathe a little easier. And beyond the material considerations, they had built something precious, a life filled with purpose and connection, a place in the world that was undeniably theirs. As Danny skipped ahead to chase a butterfly, his laughter floating back to her on the evening breeze, Cetinha allowed herself a moment of pure joy. They had survived the worst. They were building the best, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger for all they had already overcome. But what new challenges await as Danny grows older? Will the father who abandoned them reappear? And how will Cetinha's dream of completing her education play out against the demands of her partnership with Uberta? The answers await as our story continues. The years passed with the relentless momentum that time acquires when life settles into its routines. Danny grew from a toddler into a schoolboy, tall for his age with his mother's thoughtful eyes and a curious mind that devoured books and questions. In equal measure, the shop prospered under the combined talents of Uberta and Cetinha, gaining a reputation for quality work that drew customers from across the city. Cetinha herself had changed as well, though the transformation was more subtle. The desperate young woman who had once counted every penny had evolved into a confident businesswoman who made strategic decisions about inventory and staffing. The exhaustion that had been her constant companion during those early years had receded, replaced by a steady energy fueled by purpose rather than fear. She had even finally completed her associate's degree in education through night classes and weekend seminars, crossing a finish line that had once seemed impossibly distant. Danny was 8 when the letter arrived, addressed in handwriting that Cetinha recognized instantly, despite the years that had passed. She stood in the shop, staring at the envelope as if it might suddenly spring to life and bite her. Uberta, observing her reaction from behind the counter, raised a questioning eyebrow. "Bad news?" she asked, direct as always. Cetinha shook her head, not in negation but in disbelief. "It's from Thomas," she said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "Danny's father." Uberta's expression darkened. After all this time, what could he possibly want? It was a question Cetinha couldn't answer until she opened the letter, something she wasn't prepared to do in the middle of the workday with customers coming and going. She slipped the envelope into her pocket, where it seemed to burn against her hip for the remainder of the afternoon. That evening, after Danny was asleep, she sat at their small kitchen table and finally broke the seal. The letter inside was brief, the words carefully chosen in a way that suggested multiple drafts before this final version. Thomas explained that he had been in California for the past several years, working construction and getting his head straight. He expressed regret for his actions, for leaving without a proper goodbye, for abandoning his responsibilities. He asked about Danny, how he was, what he was like, whether he ever asked about his father. And finally, most unsettlingly, he indicated that he would be returning to Chicago and hoped to meet with Cetinha to discuss the possibility of reconnecting with his son. The letter included a phone number where he could be reached, a tentative date for his arrival in the city, and a formal closing that felt oddly impersonal after the emotional content that preceded it. No declarations of lingering feelings for Cetinha, no romantic overtures, just a man seeking to establish contact with the child he had left behind. Cetinha read the letter 3 times, trying to process the implications of Thomas's reappearance in their lives. Her initial reaction was anger. How dare he walk away for 8 years and then casually request re-entry? What right did he have? To Danny, after contributing nothing to his upbringing, his health, his education, his happiness. But beneath the anger lay more complicated emotions. Danny had asked about his father over the years, questions that became more specific and poignant. As he grew older and observed other children with their dads, Cetinha had never spoken ill of Thomas, had simply explained that he wasn't ready to be a father and had left before Danny was born. She had assured her son that the absence was not his fault, that he was loved and wanted and enough. But she had seen the shadow that crossed his face sometimes when fathers and sons appeared in books or movies, the quiet longing he couldn't fully articulate. Did she have the right to deny Danny the chance to know his father, even if that father had proven himself unreliable? Was her anger at Thomas more important than her son's potential relationship with him? And what would introducing Thomas into their carefully constructed life mean for all of them? These questions kept Cetinha awake long into the night, turning possibilities over in her mind as she listened to Danny's steady breathing from the bedroom next door. By morning, she had reached no clear conclusion, only the certainty that this decision would shape their future in ways she couldn't fully predict. Uberta, when consulted, was characteristically blunt in her assessment. "Men who run once tend to run again," she said over coffee in the shop's back room. "But the boy has a right to know where he comes from. Just be careful about promises." Thomas's, or your own. Better no expectations than broken ones. Wanda, who had remained a close friend over the years, offered a different perspective. "People can change," she said during their weekly phone call. 8 years is a long time. The man who left might not be the same man who's coming back." Her voice softened with understanding. "But only you know what's right for you and Danny. Trust your gut, Cetinha. It's gotten you this far." After days of deliberation, Cetinha finally called the number Thomas had provided. The conversation was awkward, stilted with the weight of their history and the uncertainty of the present moment. They agreed to meet at a cafe near the shop, neutral territory where they could talk without Danny's knowledge until Cetinha decided how to proceed. Seeing Thomas again after 8 years was a surreal experience. He looked older, of course, lines around his eyes, a maturity to his features that hadn't been there before, but he was still recognizable as the man she had once loved, the father of her child, the person whose abandonment had forced her to become stronger than she had ever imagined possible. "You look good," he said after they had ordered coffee, his eyes taking in the changes in her appearance. "Really good." "Life has been kind," she replied, a simplification that glossed over the years of struggle but felt true nonetheless. "Eventually." Thomas nodded, seeming to understand all that remained unspoken. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice steady but his fingers fidgeting with his napkin. "What I did, leaving like that, it was cowardly, unforgivable, really." "Then why are you here?" Cetinja asked, not unkindly but with genuine curiosity. "If you believe it's unforgivable, what are you hoping to accomplish?" His answer revealed a self-awareness that surprised her. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I'm not even asking to be part of your life again, but I've spent years thinking about Danny, wondering about him, regretting that I wasn't there to see him grow up. I'd like a chance to know him, if that's possible, on whatever terms you think are appropriate." The conversation that followed was long and difficult, full of explanations that couldn't fully justify actions and questions that had no simple answers. Thomas spoke of his own father's abandonment, of the panic he had felt when confronted with impending parenthood, of the years he had spent working through his issues with the help of therapy. Cetinja shared glimpses of the life she and Danny had built, careful not to reveal too much vulnerability, but wanting Thomas to understand the context of the world he was asking to enter. By the time they parted ways, Cetinja had made no promises beyond agreeing to think about his request and contact him again within the week. As she walked back to the shop, her mind churned with conflicting thoughts. Thomas seemed sincere in his regret, genuine in his desire to know his son. But good intentions didn't guarantee good outcomes, and Danny's emotional well-being had to be her primary concern. The decision, when it finally crystallized, came from an unexpected source. That evening, as they sat together at dinner, Danny looked up from his plate with the thoughtful expression that often preceded his most challenging questions. "Mom," he began, his voice casual but his eyes intent, "Joey in my class is going fishing with his dad this weekend. Why don't I ever do stuff like that with my dad?" The question wasn't new, but something about the timing made it feel significant. Cetinja put down her fork, giving her son her full attention. "You know that your dad left before you were born," she said gently. "We've talked about that." Danny nodded, pushing his peas around his plate. "But people can come back, right? If they go away, they can still come back someday." The hope in his voice, the simple faith that things lost might someday be restored, made Cetinja's decision clear. Danny deserved the chance to know his father, not because Thomas deserved forgiveness, but because Danny deserved the opportunity to form his own understanding of the man whose absence had shaped his life. "Sometimes they can," she agreed, choosing her words carefully. "Would you want to meet your dad if he came back?" Danny's eyes widened with surprise at the question, as if the possibility had never seemed truly real before. "Would he want to meet me?" he asked, vulnerability clear in his expression. "Very much," Cetinja assured him, the truth of this one thing at least not in doubt after her conversation with Thomas. The smile that broke across Danny's face, hopeful, excited, tinged with nervousness, confirmed that she was making the right choice, however complicated its execution might prove to be. The reunion between father and son was arranged with careful attention to Danny's comfort. A Saturday afternoon at a local park, with Cetinja present throughout, and a clear understanding that this was just a meeting, not a promise of ongoing involvement unless all parties were comfortable moving forward. Watching Danny and Thomas together, seeing the similarities in their gestures and smiles, observing the tentative connections forming between them, was both painful and beautiful for Cetinja. There was loss in it, an acknowledgement of all the years Thomas had missed and could never reclaim. But there was also possibility, a chance for Danny to fill in a missing piece of his own story. As the afternoon drew to a close, with plans made for another meeting the following weekend, Cetinha found herself facing yet another crossroads. Thomas's return had unsettled the carefully balanced life she had constructed, introducing new variables and potential complications. But it had also opened doors to questions she had long avoided, about her own future, about what she wanted beyond security for Danny, about dreams deferred but not forgotten. Standing at the edge of the park, watching Danny show Thomas a trick he had learned on the monkey bars, Cetinha realized that the story she had been living was far from its conclusion. New chapters were beginning, with challenges and possibilities she was only starting to comprehend. Will Thomas become the father Danny hopes for? Will Cetinha pursue her own dreams now that Danny's needs are shared? Can these three people, bound by blood and history, but separated by years of absence, form a new kind of family? The answers await as we continue our journey together. The integration of Thomas into their lives proceeded with cautious optimism over the following months. He never asked for more than Cetinha was willing to give, respecting the boundaries she established with a humility that seemed born of genuine remorse. Saturday afternoons became their regular time together, Thomas and Danny exploring museums or playing baseball in the park, building a relationship one conversation, one shared experience at a time. Danny flourished under the attention, growing more confident and outspoken. The questions about his father that had once been hesitant and tinged with sadness were replaced by excited recountings of their activities together. "Dad showed me how to throw a curveball," he would announce at dinner, or "Dad says I'm really good at math, just like him." Each dad sent a complicated ripple through Cetinha's heart. Joy at her son's happiness mingled with a wistfulness for all the years Thomas had missed, for all the times she had been both mother and father to Danny, with no one to share the weight or the wonder. Uberta observed these changes with her characteristic blend of wisdom and wariness. "The man seems to be trying," she acknowledged one afternoon as they closed the shop, "but feelings change, commitments waver. Be glad for what he's giving the boy now, but keep your eyes open for what might come." It was sound advice, rooted in Uberta's own experiences with the inconstancy of men. But as the weeks turned to months, Thomas remained steady in his dedication to building a relationship with his son. He never missed a scheduled visit, never arrived unprepared or inattentive. He attended Danny's school play, cheered at his little league games, helped with homework when asked. He made no romantic overtures towards Cetinha, no attempt to reclaim what they had once been to each other. Their relationship evolved instead into a careful partnership centered entirely on Danny's well-being. It was not friendship exactly, but a mutual respect born of shared purpose. As Danny's 10th birthday approached, Thomas proposed something new. A weekend camping trip, just the two of them, at a state park a few hours from the city. It would be their first overnight together, their first extended period without Cetinha as a buffer or backup. The request prompted the first serious disagreement between Cetinha and Thomas since his return. Not because she objected to the idea, in principle, but because it represented a significant shift in their carefully negotiated arrangement. "He's still so young," she argued during a tense conversation at their usual cafe. "And you're still getting to know each other. What if something goes wrong? What if he gets homesick or scared?" Thomas listened to her concerns without interruption, his expression thoughtful. "Those are all valid points," he said when she had finished. "And if you're not comfortable with it, we won't go. But Danny's been talking about camping for months, and I thought—" He hesitated, choosing his words with care. I thought it might be good for him to see that I can be reliable, that I can take care of him on my own, that I'm not going to disappear again. The underlying message was clear. Thomas was asking for trust, not just access. He was asking Cetinha to believe that he had changed, that the man who had abandoned them was not the man sitting across from her now. It was Wanda who helped Cetinha navigate this new territory. Over coffee in Wanda's colourful kitchen, surrounded by the cheerful chaos of her friend's life, Cetinha voiced the fears she had been reluctant to acknowledge, even to herself. "What if he takes Danny away?" she asked, the words catching in her throat. Not literally, but what if Danny decides he prefers his father? What if all these years of sacrifice and struggle don't matter as much as weekend adventures with Dad? Wanda's response was gentle but firm. "That boy adores you," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze Cetinha's hand. "Nothing and no one could ever change that. But part of loving our children is letting them expand their worlds beyond us. It's scary as hell, but it's necessary." She paused, her expression softening with understanding. "And Cetinha, maybe it's time to think about expanding your world too. You've been Danny's mom for so long, and you'll always be that, but you're also a woman with her own dreams, her own life to live. If Thomas is stepping up to share some of the parenting load, maybe that's not just good for Danny. Maybe it's good for you too." The camping trip, when Cetinha finally agreed to it, was a success by all accounts. Danny returned sunburned and exhausted, but bubbling with stories of fish caught and released, of stars brighter than he had ever seen in the city, of ghost stories told around the campfire. Thomas, equally tired but visibly pleased, returned him safely as promised, with all gear accounted for and only minor mishaps to report. "He did great," Thomas told Cetinha as Danny unpacked his backpack with enthusiastic commentary about each item. "Really great. You've raised an amazing kid." The compliment, simple but sincere, acknowledged what Cetinha sometimes feared was invisible: the years of work and worry and love that had gone into raising Danny alone. The acknowledgement felt like a gift, an understanding between them that transcended their complicated past. As the camping trip led to other shared activities, and as Thomas became an increasingly consistent presence in Danny's life, Cetinha found herself with something she hadn't experienced in years. Time. Time to think, to plan, to dream beyond the immediate needs of the day. Time to consider what she wanted for herself, not just for Danny. The idea had been germinating for months, perhaps years, a small seed of possibility that she had never allowed to fully take root. But with Danny older now, with Thomas sharing some of the parenting responsibilities, with the shop stable and profitable under her and Uberta's guidance, Cetinha began to revisit her original dream of becoming a teacher. The path would not be easy. Her associate's degree was a foundation, but she would need to complete a bachelor's degree and obtain certification, a process that would require significant time and resources. Yet the possibility called to her with increasing clarity, a vision of a future that honored both her commitment to Danny and her own aspirations. When she finally broached the subject with Uberta, the older woman's response was characteristically blunt but supportive. "About time," she said, barely looking up from the intricate beadwork she was applying to a wedding dress. "Been wondering when you'd get around to that again." "You knew I was thinking about it?" Cetinha asked, surprised. Uberta snorted softly. "Girl, I've known you for how many years now? Seen how you light up when you talk about those community center classes. Seen how you keep all those education books on your nightstand." She set down her needle, fixing Cetinha with a direct gaze. "You're a good tailor, a damn good one, but that's not all you were meant to be." The words, coming from a woman who had dedicated her life to the craft of tailoring, might have seemed like criticism. But Cetinha understood them for what they were, permission. Permission to want more, to reach for something beyond the safe harbor they had built together. "The shop," she began, but Uberta waved away her concern. "The shop will be fine. We can hire help for the hours you're in class. Been thinking about taking on an apprentice anyway. Some of these young people coming out of design school have good ideas, even if their execution needs work. The practical details would need to be addressed. Finances, schedules, childcare arrangements, during the times when neither she nor Thomas was available. But the biggest obstacle had always been in Cetinya's mind. The fear that pursuing her own dreams might somehow shortchange Danny, might make her less than the devoted mother she had always strived to be. That fear began to dissolve the night. She shared her plans with Danny, expecting resistance or worry from a child who had known only her constant presence. Instead, he received the news with surprising enthusiasm. "You'd be the best teacher ever," he declared, his faith in her abilities absolute. "Be better than Mrs. Kruger, who never answers questions properly." He pondered for a moment, then added thoughtfully, "I could help with dinner sometimes on your class nights. Dad showed me how to make spaghetti last weekend." The casual offer, delivered with such confidence, was a revelation. Danny didn't see her aspirations as a threat to his security or a diminishment of her love. He saw them as a natural extension of who she was, a part of the mother he had always known, a woman who worked hard, who pursued goals with determination, who never stopped trying to build a better life. As fall approached, bringing with it the start of the academic year, Cetinya took the first tangible steps toward her renewed goal. She enrolled in evening classes at the local state university, arranged a modified schedule at the shop with Uberta's blessing, and worked out a new co-parenting arrangement with Thomas that gave him more regular time with Danny. The transition was not without challenges. There were nights when she arrived home exhausted from a full day at the shop, followed by hours of lectures and discussions. There were moments of doubt, when the academic demands seemed overwhelming after so many years. Away from formal education, there were occasional pangs of guilt when work and school obligations meant missing one of Danny's baseball games or school events. But there were victories too, the satisfaction of acing a difficult exam, the joy of engaging with ideas and information that expanded her understanding of the world, the growing confidence that she was modeling for Danny the importance of perseverance and lifelong learning. And somewhat to her surprise, there was an unexpected dimension of personal growth beyond the academic. As her world expanded to include classmates and professors, study groups and campus activities, Cetinya began to rediscover parts of herself that had been set aside during the long years of single parenthood and survival. Her sense of humor, her enjoyment of intellectual debate, her appreciation for art and music and ideas, all were reawakened in this new chapter of her life. One evening, as she sat at their kitchen table surrounded by textbooks and notes, Danny approached with 2 mugs of hot chocolate, solemnly placing one beside her before taking a seat with his own. "Mrs. Peterson says you're the bravest person she knows," he informed her, blowing on his drink to cool it, "because of going back to school and everything." Cetinya smiled, touched by the elderly neighbor's assessment, but aware of its limitations. "There are many kinds of bravery," she said, reaching out to smooth a cowlick in Danny's hair. "Sometimes it's about facing big challenges. But sometimes it's just about getting up every day and doing what needs to be done, even when it's hard." Danny considered this, his expression thoughtful beyond his years, like when Dad left and it was just you and me. The question, delivered so matter-of-factly, caught Cetinya off guard. They had never discussed those early days in detail, her instinct always to shield Danny from the full extent of the hardship they had faced. "Yes," she said carefully, "that was a difficult time, but we made it through together." Danny nodded, apparently satisfied with this confirmation. "I'm glad Dad came back," he said after a moment. But I'm glad it was just us for a while too, because now I know—" He trailed off, seemingly struggling to articulate a complex thought. Cetinja waited, giving him time to find the words. "Now I know that even if bad things happen, we'll be okay," he finally continued, "because you always figure things out. And now I'm getting bigger, so I can help too." Danny's words touched Cetinja deeply. In them she heard not just love, but something even more precious: trust. Not blind faith that nothing bad would ever happen, but a resilient confidence that whatever challenges came their way, they would face them together and emerge stronger. "We will be okay," she agreed, reaching across the table to clasp his hand. "Better than okay." That night, as she tucked Danny into bed, Cetinja found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the desperate young woman reading a goodbye note beside an empty drawer, to the confident businesswoman and student she was becoming, the transformation seemed almost miraculous when viewed from a distance. But she knew it had been built, moment by moment, choice by choice, day by difficult day. The following spring brought changes that none of them could have anticipated. Uberta, whose health had been gradually declining, suffered a minor stroke that left her physically diminished but mentally sharp as ever. Though she recovered enough to visit the shop regularly, the doctor's orders were clear. Her days of full-time work were over. "Guess this partnership is about to become something else," she told Cetinja from her hospital bed, her tone matter-of-fact despite the gravity of the situation. "You ready to take the reins completely, girl?" The question was both a challenge and an expression of confidence. Uberta wouldn't have asked if she didn't already know the answer. Still, the responsibility weighed heavily on Cetinja as she navigated this new reality, running the shop full-time while continuing her education part-time, all while ensuring Danny's needs were met. Thomas proved unexpectedly valuable during this period of transition. Without being asked, he stepped up his involvement in Danny's daily life, taking him to and from school on days when Cetinja needed to be at the shop early or late, helping with homework, attending parent-teacher conferences when she couldn't. There was no romantic reconciliation, no attempt to recreate the family they might have been, but there was a partnership of a different kind, built on mutual respect and shared devotion to their son. "We make a good team," Thomas observed one evening as they discussed Danny's upcoming science fair project. Different skills, different perspectives, but the same goal. Cetinja nodded, acknowledging the truth in his assessment. They had found their way to a relationship neither of them could have envisioned during those years of absence and resentment. Not lovers, not quite friends, but co-parents in the truest sense of the word. As Danny approached his 12th birthday, Cetinja made a decision that had been fermenting in her mind for months. The apartment above the shop, comfortable as it had become, was growing too small for a boy on the cusp of adolescence. With the business thriving under her management and her teaching degree within reach, it was time to consider the next step in their journey. The house, she found, was modest but charming, located in a neighborhood with excellent schools and safe streets. It needed work. The kitchen was outdated, the backyard overgrown, the bedrooms in need of fresh paint. But Cetinja saw beyond these superficial flaws to the potential beneath. This could be the home where Danny would navigate his teenage years, where he would bring friends and eventually dates, where he would grow into the man he was becoming. The decision to buy it, to commit to roots deeper than any they had established before, was both terrifying and exhilarating. It meant taking on a mortgage, becoming responsible for repairs and maintenance, investing in a future that still felt somewhat precarious despite all they had achieved. But when she showed the house to Danny, his reaction confirmed she had made the right choice. He walked through the rooms with widening eyes, exclaiming over features she hadn't even noticed. The built-in bookshelf in what would be his room, The oak tree perfect for climbing in the backyard, the window seat where he could read on rainy days. "Can we really live here?" he asked, his voice hushed with wonder as they stood in the empty living room, sunlight streaming through dusty windows. "Just us? And sometimes your dad, if he wants to visit," Cetinja clarified. "But yes, this would be our home, if you like it." Danny's response was a hug so fierce it nearly knocked her off balance, his growing body solid against hers in a way that reminded her how quickly childhood was slipping away. "I love it," he whispered. "I love our life, Mom." The move coincided with Cetinja's graduation, a timing that made both events feel like parts of a single transition, the completion of one chapter and the beginning of another. The ceremony itself was modest, a springtime gathering on the university quadrangle with hundreds of other graduates of varying ages and backgrounds. But for Cetinja, walking across that stage to receive her diploma represented the culmination of a dream deferred but never abandoned. Danny and Thomas sat together in the audience, cheering louder than decorum, strictly allowed when her name was called. Uberta, now using a cane, but refusing the wheelchair they had brought just in case, stood with them, her pride evident in the rare tears that glistened in her eyes. Later, at the small celebration they held in their new home, still partially unpacked, with boxes stacked in corners and furniture arranged in temporary configurations, Uberta presented Cetinja with a gift. It was a leather-bound portfolio, elegant and professional, embossed with her initials in gold. "For your teaching interviews," Uberta explained, her voice gruff with emotion. "Not that you need it. Any school would be lucky to have you." The gift represented more than just a practical item for her career search. It was Uberta's blessing, her acknowledgement that Cetinja's path was leading away from the tailor shop that had been their shared domain for so many years. There was sadness in that recognition, but also a deep satisfaction. They had built something valuable together, something that would continue even as their individual journeys diverged. The teaching position, when it came, was at a middle school, not far from their new home, a perfect fit that allowed Cetinja to be present for Danny's after-school activities while pursuing the career she had dreamed of for so long. The adjustment was challenging in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. After years of the relative autonomy of the tailor shop, the structured environment of a school took some getting used to. But the work itself, engaging with young minds, guiding students through the complexities of language and literature, fulfilled her in ways she had only imagined. One evening in late autumn, as she sat on their new front porch grading papers while Danny practiced basketball dribbling in the driveway, Thomas arrived for his weekly dinner with their son. He paused at the bottom of the steps, taking in the domestic scene with an expression Cetinja couldn't quite interpret. "You did it," he said finally, his voice quiet enough that Danny, absorbed in his practice, couldn't hear. "Everything you always said you wanted to do, the degree, the teaching, the house, you made it all happen." There was no bitterness in his tone, no resentment for being excluded from the life she had built, just a simple acknowledgement of her achievement, colored with what sounded like genuine admiration. "We did it," Cetinja corrected, gesturing toward Danny. "He's the reason for all of it, the motivation to keep going when it seemed impossible." Thomas nodded, accepting this truth, even as his eyes suggested he understood what remained unspoken, that Cetinja's journey had been about more than just providing for their son. It had been about reclaiming her own dreams, about becoming the woman she had always believed she could be, despite the obstacles life had placed in her path. "He's lucky to have you," Thomas said simply. "We both are." The statement, delivered without expectation or agenda, felt like the closing of a circle that had begun with a half-empty drawer and a note that said, "I'm not ready." They had all traveled so far from that moment. Cetinja from desperate single mother to confident professional, Danny from helpless infant to spirited preteen, Thomas from absent father to committed co-parent. The journey had been neither straight nor easy, but it had brought them to a place where healing was possible, where forgiveness could coexist with accountability, where the future stretched before them with promise rather than dread. As Danny ran over to greet his father, basketball tucked under one arm and a smile brightening his face, Cetinha felt a sense of completion that transcended the material achievements of house and career and financial stability. This, she realized, was what success truly meant. Not the absence of struggle or the achievement of perfection, but the creation of a life rich with purpose and connection, a life where past wounds could heal without being forgotten, where each challenge overcome became a foundation for future growth. The path ahead would hold its own difficulties, Danny's adolescence with all its complexities, the evolving dynamics of their unconventional family, the new challenges that her teaching career would inevitably present. But Cetinha faced these prospects not with fear, but with a quiet confidence born of experience. They had weathered the worst storms together. They had built a life from the fragments of broken dreams. They had discovered strength they never knew they possessed. As Thomas and Danny headed inside, already deep in conversation about school and basketball and weekend plans, Cetinha remained on the porch for a moment longer. The autumn evening was settling around her, crisp and clear, with the first stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. She thought of that young woman from years ago, standing in a sparse apartment with a baby and a goodbye note, certain that her life was ending when, in fact, it was just beginning. If she could send a message back through time to that frightened version of herself, what would she say? Perhaps simply this: keep going, it gets better. The journey is long and the path is rarely straight, but every step forward matters. Every moment of perseverance counts. Every act of love leaves its mark on the world. Danny called to her from inside the house, his voice a reminder of all they had built together, all they had yet to experience. Cetinha took a deep breath of the cool evening air, gathering these thoughts of past and future into her heart. Then she stood, straightened her shoulders, and went inside to join her family, the one they had created not through conventional means, but through choice and commitment and unconditional love. In the warmth of their home, surrounded by evidence of their journey, Danny's school certificates pinned to the refrigerator, Cetinha's teaching materials spread across the dining table, photographs that chronicled their shared history, they represented something powerful, a testament to the human capacity for growth and change, for overcoming adversity, for building meaning from life's most difficult challenges. Their story wasn't perfect, wasn't the fairy tale that young Cetinha might once have imagined for herself, but it was authentic and hard-won, shaped by both struggle and joy, failure and triumph. And in its imperfection lay its greatest beauty, the beauty of real life, messy and complicated and infinitely precious. As they gathered around the dinner table that evening, the conversation flowing easily between them, Cetinha caught Danny watching her with an expression that mirrored her own feelings, a mixture of contentment and wonder at the life they had created together. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that all the hardship had been worth it. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every tear shed in private so he wouldn't see, all of it had led to this. Not just survival, but flourishing. Not just getting by, but truly living. And that perhaps was the greatest victory of all. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.